Have you ever been watching a video and hear someone refer to you as collective or spiritual collective? In this video, I wanted to break down and explain the deep interconnected roots of what this actually means. Now, the reason why people may refer to you or me or others as collective or a spiritual collective is because you could look at the spiritual collective as being like a class in a school. Life or existence is the school, and we are all simultaneously students while we are also teachers. We are all teaching each other lessons while also learning lessons from each other. A perfect example is like something I discussed recently on this channel with darkness and light. We have something like the yin yang because there's light in the darkness and darkness in the light. But oftentimes when people operate at low levels of consciousness, they see certain situations in life as just being bad or evil, or certain people just being bad or evil, and that's it. And they don't see the lessons that they're supposed to learn with the situation. Simple example I could give of this is a kid touching a hot stove and getting burned and then learning that the stove is hot. Now, they could just become bitter and traumatized by that and just say the stove is evil and just go through life like that. Or they could also be like, hey, the lesson that I learned from this is that the stove is hot. When the stove is hot, that I shouldn't touch it. Oftentimes people fall into the first category. Something happens where they get heartbroken or betrayed or whatever else, and they just see the person or situation as evil and not the lesson that comes along with it. For instance, let's say you're dating someone and they cheat on you. Lots of times people will just be like, oh, they're evil, they're bad, they're terrible. This is a terrible situation. What actually ends up happening is that situation lights a fire inside you. And what ends up happening is for the people who heal through that, they raise to a higher level of consciousness. And then when they look back and realize there was multiple red flags that they were ignoring, and this whole scenario helped sharpen their discernment and intuition, making them be able to go through life and be able to better pick up and tell the people who are deceitful and the people who are truthful. This is why a lot of people who make spiritual videos will also say, if this resonates with you. It's just like in school. Someone who's like in first grade or second grade will probably not be able to understand some of the lessons that come with being in ninth grade or 10th grade. While there may be some who are advanced, and just like in school, how you have advanced classes, there are advanced souls or people. So your spiritual collective is your class. It's you as well as other people who vibrate on the same frequency as you, or who are on the same level of consciousness and can perceive what you can perceive as well. And that's why there's really no point in trying to argue with people about what the truth is, because there are some people who are in third grade and there's some of us who are in 11th grade. And this also gets into the time aspect, which could be tricky to understand, but just like I mentioned, if this resonates with you, it resonates. If it doesn't, it doesn't. The linear time scale that we experience that lots of people think is true is not true. There is no past, present, and future, but rather everything is one. Everything is happening at once. So you might say, well, why do we experience in a linear fashion? This goes back to my school analogy. So the information is already there. When you go through school, your class is dependent on your level. So even though you're in third grade, there is still the information for what comes in fourth, fifth, sixth, and whatever else grade. You just haven't experienced it because it would be way too much for you to experience or have everything dumped on you all at once. It would be overwhelming. So we experience things in a linear fashion to learn in a process so it isn't too much. So continuing with the school analogy, as you go to the next grade or the next level, you experience and learn new lessons and new things. That information was already there. You're just learning it at your designated quote unquote time. And with life, it's the same sort of thing. This is why as what we perceive to be time, as things go on in a linear fashion, we start learning, experiencing, or inventing new things. This is why every year scientists discover new species of animals. Did the animals just magically form or were created, or did they always exist and we're just now at a consciousness to where we can experience them? Another example I could give is the person who breaks up with their boyfriend or girlfriend, and weeks or months or years later, they're looking back and they're like, I can't even believe I ever liked that person. Now, some of these people are just being prideful and they're trying to brush it off and act like they're too good for the person. But some of these people have honestly raised to higher levels of consciousness, which is what triggered them to leave that person in the first place because they learned a lesson. I gave this example in another video, but you'll have some women who keep returning back to their abusive boyfriend over and over and over. Why? They're repeating old cycles because they haven't learned a lesson. Until you learn a lesson, you can't move on to the next grade level. This is why, just like in school, people are recycled or people have to repeat grades. So you have to keep repeating lessons in life until you learn the lesson. Once you learned a lesson, you could then move on to experience new lessons and new things that are greater. So some of these people raised to higher levels of consciousness. They realize, like, what did I ever see in that person? Because they learned a lesson and they actually moved on to the next grade level. Just like in another video that I made before, consciousness shapes or creates reality. This is why you could have someone who's in the desert, right? The sun's beating down them. It's hot. They could feel the heat of the sun. They could see the sun and they could see all the sand. But the minute they're knocked out, the sun no longer exists to them. The sand no longer exists. Nothing around them exists, and they are labeled unconscious. But to everyone else who is still conscious, it still exists. So your level of consciousness dictates your reality, and with higher levels of consciousness, you're able to perceive, receive, and create greater things. This is why there was a point in time when drinking and driving was perfectly legal and okay in America, but today it's not, because we are operating at a higher level of consciousness. Same thing as with the Egyptian pyramids or anything else of that nature. To this day, that cannot be explained to science or by scientists of how it was created. Why? Because people were operating at a very high level of consciousness when that was created, and then people were brought back down. So consciousness can raise and lower up based upon the various things that go on. And with every spiritual collective or class, there will be people who get recycled. The problem is that when you get too attached to these people and you don't want to let them go and you keep trying to force information on them, or you want to stick around them, and these people are literally weighing you down, holding you back because they're repeating old cycles they haven't learned. And because you're too busy holding on them, now you get trapped in a loop and you end up getting recycled too. And this is also why there could be people who physically their body looks like it's 40 or 50, but you could tell by speaking with them, their mind is like 20 or 19 or whatever, because this is based on consciousness. So there are people who physically are one thing, but mentally and spiritually are something completely different, all because they're repeating old cycles that they have not learned. And to further explain this or kind of end this video off, going through this school or experience of life and existence is kind of like a puzzle. You're blind to what the full image is until you start putting pieces together. So it's like with every step, with every lesson, you learn more and more, and then it further puts pieces of the puzzle together. So the image becomes clearer and clearer, and you start seeing things for what it actually is. The problem is when people get stuck on an image that's incomplete, or something where they don't have the full image and they just want to be hard-headed and say, this is it, this is reality, there's nothing greater than this, this is how things are, blah blah blah. And this is the mentality a lot of people get stuck in, where they just doom themselves essentially in life. And the final thing I'll say in this video, like I said in another, it's called existence because we all exist. Everything exists. The birds, the plants, the bees, the trees, you and me. This is why it's called the universe. It's the you and I verse. We're all here to be students and learn, but we're all also here to teach, and we all collectively operate as one because everything together forms the universe. You know, you could look at a house and be like, oh, you know, that's a door, that's a doorknob, that's a light, you know, that's a window, whatever. And you could observe all those parts as being separate from each other, but together, what do they all make? The house. So just like the various parts that I just named, we all have different roles to play, but together we all are unified, and together we all make the universe or existence or the house. Thank you guys for watching. I hope this video found the spiritual collective that it's supposed to reach. Take care.